Hello, hello. Hi again. I'm back to do a very special report about Chiron. This one is really exciting for me, and it's a super deep dive into the history going on around when Chiron was discovered and what Chiron's return is going to be looking like also, because we're going to be seeing Chiron have its very first return. Now, that won't be happening until next year, but Chiron is ingressing into Taurus, which is the sign that it was discovered in. So that's very exciting. And there's quite a few of us that are coming up upon our Chiron return and what that looks for us, as well as what it might look like for our country. I think that there's already some talk about what Chiron is going to be looking like going into Taurus. I think that there's some fear-based talk going on. But I'm actually excited to look at what it means for us with an evolutionary aspect, with the intent of looking at what it means for us moving forward. And a good way to look at that is to look at what the chart looked like when Chiron was discovered. So, Chiron was discovered in 1977 on November 1st. And that means that pretty much all of 1977 was important because it was leading up to this discovery that brought about a lot of awareness and change, like for our environment. People started caring about the environment for once. And we can see in the chart why that started happening. And so Chiron was discovered by a person named Charles Kowal at Caltech at the Palomar Observatory in San Diego County, California. And uh, initially, it was classified as an asteroid and a minor planet. Um, and in 1989, they actually discovered that Chiron behaved more like a comet. So it got reclassified as a comet and minor planet. And then in the 2010s, leading up to the early 2020s, um, from some occultation events where um, planets move in front of other planets, and we get to see clues about some planets in relationship to other planets. And that's what happened is occultation. When we have eclipses, that's what that is. And they discovered by observing Chiron during this time that Chiron actually has rings around it. And it is the only classified comet with rings around it. And the rings are constantly changing, actually. And they have been observing Chiron gaining a third ring, and when it only had two, and the shape of the rings have changed. And that's interesting because Chiron is out there in between Saturn and Uranus in that Kepler belt area with all of those objects. And so I'm sure that the rings have something to do with bringing objects into its gravitational pull and pushing out others. And it is like a cycle. And it's very interesting to think that this object out there that we have named Chiron is so complex because Chiron in mythology was the wounded healer. So, and another thing about Chiron was that they had pre-covery, which is pre-discovery images that dated back to 1895. And those were the images that they used to help identify the orbit of Chiron, which is pretty erratic. Chiron stays in Aries for a very long time because of how far out um, Chiron travels in the sign of Aries. Chiron stays in Taurus for quite a while too, but not as long as Aries. So that's interesting stuff about its discovery. Now, at the time in 1977, when Chiron was discovered, around the time that Chiron was discovered, there were a lot of things going on, a lot of changes. And some of the things that I want to mention have to do with what Chiron is about. And the archetype, the mythology, the kinds of things that we started paying more attention to after Chiron's discovery, which is usually what happens when a planet gets discovered and named and studied, that we see that our cultures of the earth, all of them, tend to start learning from this archetype. And with Chiron being a wounded healer, we're looking at certain changes around healing our society, our culture, our earth. So in 1977, and see, I went to Wikipedia to look up a bunch of stuff. And so here's the rundown. In January of 1997, it was pretty cold. It was cold enough to snow in Florida, and that was unheard of at the time. It was very impressive weather. And so, people are kind of scratching their heads and looking in the environment and wondering what's going on. And Alaska, during that same month of January of 1977, had its record warmest month. So we're having some indications about the climate, which is fully on our minds now, right? But back then, it wasn't. It really wasn't. We were just starting to want to save things. The 60s led into the 70s, and we were wanting to save the whales and all kinds of environmental things were starting to brew. It's not the full-blown thing that it is now, back then. And we were having a energy crisis, the 1970s energy crisis that were caused by the 1973 oil crisis, and then after Chiron's discovery, the 1979 oil crisis, which basically indicated that we needed to shift towards energy saving technology, right? This is all just a reminder of where we were back in the late 70s. And the Department of Energy was created in 1977. Jimmy Carter was taking office in January of 1977. And Jimmy Carter infamously cared about the environment. And that's the way the pendulum swings, right? Just that's one thing that we can count on in our country, the United States, is that our election cycles, they go back and forth. And that's why I don't necessarily get too attached to one side or the other. I just watch the, the right and then the left and then the right, and we move forward no matter what. So, Jimmy Carter, not a very popular guy these days, but at the time he was elected president in 1977. And so we can see what people were kind of psychologically going through. Um, oh, Elvis died in 1977. That's a huge change from, that was really an end of a huge, very loud, mm, and gratuitous era, right? Bigger than life, everything. Um, you know, right in the 70s, at the end of the 70s, that's when we're starting to move into looking at importing compact cars due to the energy crisis, which was the oil crisis. And so, this is where we were just before we were making steps towards being more energy efficient and thinking about the environment. And so this is all very important. Um, there were a couple of disasters that happened that caused millions of dollars in damage. There was a flood in Virginia, and it caused $15 million in damage. And I mean, that's a lot for the 70s, right? And then there was the Great Bakersfield a dust storm, right, in the 70s. $40 million in damages and three deaths. That's, I, that's, it's interesting because our economic recessions almost always coincide with some kind of environmental event or events. Um, the oil pipeline, the Trans-Alaska pipeline reaches Valdez, Alaska, which is a huge deal because of the oil crisis, the energy crisis. This was going to be one of the answers to being so dependent on international oil, so that we could start being more self-sufficient again. Because being conscious of the environment looked different in the 70s than it does now in 2026. Um, some things that people are well aware of and definitely will always remember about 1977 is that's the year that Star Wars came out, and also Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Saturday Night Fever, Space Mountain and Disneyland was opened, and as well as Chuck E. Cheese opened its first franchise. Wow. Exciting. 1977 was full of all kinds of new endeavors. The Apple II came out. Um, and what else? What else? And oh yes, there were Senate hearings on MK Ultra. That's huge. That is a big one that I wanted to mention actually, because we just a lot of us just understand what that means now, but back then it was absolutely unheard of. Absolutely. Nobody knew anything. And these Senate hearings happened, and still people didn't know anything because people were not quite as informed as they are today with, you know, phones in hand with information constantly coming. It was like you had to read the newspaper, and did the newspaper even report about it? Probably not. But it's something that we now know is that there were Senate hearings on the MK Ultra program and the victims. And that's huge, considering that Chiron is the wounded healer. And another exciting thing that happened in science was that Voyager 1 and 2 were launched. Um, they went, their official mission was to visit the gas planets and then keep going further and visit Uranus and Neptune, first Jupiter and Saturn. And then we have seen them go on further, and we now have images and information about the edge of our solar system. We have information about there being a substance at the edge of our solar system, which is really interesting. Um, again, I believe it's all of this plays into the energies of Chiron. In 1977, the minimum wage was increased. Actually, in November, this was signed by Jimmy Carter. It wasn't going to go into effect, though, until 1981. The wage increase was from $2.30 an hour to $3.35 an hour, and it was a huge jump. And in 1977, um, we were dealing with inflation, really bad inflation. And there was what seemed to be a gradual recovery from the energy crisis, but a persistent problem with the inflation. And so this wage increase was promised for many years down the road because they couldn't, you know, logically, they couldn't fulfill the promise yet because inflation was really uh, bad. And you think that you would want to give people more money when inflation is really bad, but it's almost like you have to wait it out. At least that is what we've always done in the past. We've always just waited it out because eventually goods can't get sold at a certain price, and so prices will have to come down, and then wage increases years down the road will make more of a difference. But it seems like was, it wasn't going to solve anybody's problem in that year. So that in itself is another kind of Chiron thing to be happening. And the US withdrew from the International Labor Organization, that is, because there were growing concerns of politicalization. That sounds really familiar, doesn't it? About withdrawing from organizations because of politicalization. And it also is very familiar because we're talking about a a Democrat that is president at the time in 1977 who isn't super popular. And currently, we have a Republican president who isn't super popular. I mean, he is with some people, but the general vibe out there, people are very upset. And it doesn't matter. Uh, Sometimes it doesn't matter what reality truly is out there. There is this perception that persists. And that's what I'm talking about. The similarity between the 1977 presidency and this presidency here that we are experiencing. And also, lastly, the US was conducting nuclear testing at a Nevada test site during the Cold War. Um, yeah. So there are these connections, many, many connections with what was going on and what seems to be a bridge between the realm of science and the realm of what is earthbound, what is material. Um, and that is what Chiron truly represents is this bridge between Saturn and Uranus, because that's where Chiron is in the sky in our solar system. And so some of the things that I mentioned on purpose because we're talking about this connection between the Earth and Saturn. We've got Saturn energies, which are things that are in place. It is the old guard, it's the way things have been. And you have Uranus out there that is trying to bring change to change through what is already set up. And sometimes it has to tear things down. And nuclear testing is very much that Uranian influence on a already foundational thing. We're gonna blow up the piece of the earth, you know? Um, Starting or, initiating the launch of Voyager 1 and 2. We're going out and exploring. This is, very pioneering um, with science and even the government creating the Department of Energy. We have energy, and we are using nuclear facilities to create energy. So all of this with energy, the crisis of energy, the technology of energy, all of this plays into how Chiron works for us. And when Chiron is influencing the earth from the sign of Taurus. And so, and I've been talking for a long time before I even brought up a chart because I just wanted to talk about the history and where we came from when we discovered Chiron. Let me see here. Let me share this chart. This is the ingress chart. So Chiron goes into when Chiron goes into Taurus, we have Chiron here. Let's see. I'm going to do something real quick so that we can see. All right, we've got Chiron right here in Taurus, 0 degrees, right as it goes in. And Chiron has been traveling with Eris right here. And so Chiron going into Taurus and leaving Eris behind is going to be giving us a little bit of a break from that feeling of not belonging. And it's going to give us a taste of what's next, because what's next is more about our own self-worth. Truly, at the very core, Chiron and Taurus is going to be bringing up values, and part of that is going to be your own self-worth. Um, It'll be bringing up stuff about relationships, probably, and all of our individual lives, money, and it will probably bring a lot of us to wanting to be out in nature more, because this is where we're going to find um, nature medicine for healing, because Chiron is the wounded healer. And so the end result of Chiron is being a healer. But first, there is the wounding, right? And so Chiron's and I forgot to mention that Chiron's first ingress into Taurus is happening on June 19th, 2026. Um, and here it's at 2:18 p.m. Pacific time. So yeah, it's happening very soon. Very soon. Chiron, see, this is when Chiron first ingresses into Taurus. Chiron won't be experiencing its own return yet, not until next year, June of next year. And I have the chart for that because I think it'll be interesting to look at also. But eventually Chiron will go retrograde and go back into Aries one last time in September 17th of 2026. So we have a little bit of time to experience what this Chiron and Taurus is going to be about for all of us individually. And it's going to be a lot of very earthy energy that is going to be asking us to uh, learn so that we can heal and in turn use our wounds for medicine to help ourselves and others. I think that there is going to be a lot of more of a resurgence of medicine that comes from nature, purely from nature, and more people are going to learn about how our ancestors really, really had a very rich and complex medicine cabinet full of things that were from the earth. Because one of the things that has been coming up for us through the current energy crisis that we are going through because this is what Chiron and Taurus is going to be about, is an awareness of energy. And there's all kinds of different kinds of energy out there. And one of the main ones that we pay the most attention to, because it's part of our culture, is oil as a way of being an energy. And oil or petroleum gets used for so many things. And I think that if you don't quite understand how many things are made with petroleum, I think that it would be a good idea to learn right now. Right now is a good time to learn about what everything is made with petroleum, because we are going to be coming into a finalizing moment, finalizing event that is all about what this energy crisis was when Chiron was first discovered. We've come a long ways with creating alternative energies and alternative medicines and alternative whatevers. And when I say alternative medicines, the irony, or whatever you want to call it, is that I'm actually talking about ancient medicines that are making a comeback. And Chiron being the wounded healer, Chiron is shamanic energy. And shamans, they bring medicine from the earth, and they also bring in energetic medicine. And it's not, you don't have to use oil, petroleum to make the medicines of the shamanic kind. And this is a big point that I want to make about Chiron going into Taurus, is that Earth medicine is going to be making a comeback, and those of us who are learning about it are going, and have been learning about it for a long time. We're going to be asked to bring our knowledge forward. We're going to be asked to help people with our knowledge, because, ultimately, petroleum-based medicine isn't the best medicine. And we have a lot going on right now that is pointing towards bringing this information out into the public, because I believe that the industries have known for a long time that their medicine is not superior to Earth medicine. They've just had to compete in a way to where they have, um, convinced people that Earth medicine isn't as good as their chemical concoctions. I'm gonna try really hard not to go on off on my soapbox on that one, because it is a huge energy that is coming forth now, and it has been. But now, and as Chiron makes its return to its discovery, there are a big group of people who have been learning and interested in this stuff for a long time. And, uh, now is the evolutionary moment where this knowledge is going to be needed and will be brought forth. Um, One of the interesting connections, it's sort of a wide orb, but there is a um, square to Venus here in Leo. And Venus is all about Venus is the ruler of Taurus. So this is another reason why Venus is involved or even being talked about here is because Venus is going to be, all about what our values are about. And as Chiron is making this first ingress here, we are seeing Venus in Leo in a square formation. And a square formation, it gets noticed. It is the energy of action, pressure. And the square is led by Venus. She's the one who is coming away from Chiron, separating from Chiron. So that square being led by Venus in Leo is really about our own self-discovery of our own inner light and the value of our own inner light, of our own individual inner light. And it's a really beautiful aspect. And because it's an awareness, you're going to be ultimately very aware of whether or not you have self-worth or not. And everybody deserves to have self-worth. Everybody deserves that. And that's one of the things that we're healing with Chiron and Taurus is that everybody has a chance, an opportunity, and definitely deserves to have self-worth. You deserve to love yourself because you exist. And that's it. Because you exist. And that's one thing that some people have a really hard time with. Just existing. We tend to spin a lot of wheels and do a lot of extra work around trying to justify our existence, or justify our self-worth. But Venus in Leo is like the queen, she's royalty. Um, and so she deserves to love herself. And we all deserve to love ourselves. I wonder if I can just clear that. Yes. Okay. So with this ingress, I wanted to show this ingress chart first because you can see that Chiron is in a square with Venus, and there is the and also there's the exact T square. Yeah, There's the exact T square happening with Uranus, which is implicated in Chiron's energies. And we've got the North Node and the South Node. And we've also got the Moon exactly conjunct the South Node. And here is the opposition here. So this T square in the sky that's happening just as Chiron ingresses into Taurus is been talked about as like paradigm shifting. And it is. It definitely is. And it wouldn't be as paradigm shifting if Chiron wasn't involved. Chiron moving into Taurus means that this paradigm shift includes the wounded healer energies. So, and, you know, one of the ways that people operate just on a daily basis is on a wounded basis. Most people operate from their wounds. And Uranus, who is the great awakener, in this aspect, this T square aspect, it feels like, and with the moon is in an exact conjunction with the South Node. There's something that we are all going to be made painfully aware of. And I say painful because it's going to be wounds. There's going to be wounds that you are going to become more aware of. And there's going to be wounds upon this earth that we're going to become more aware of. One of the reasons why I say that about the earth is we have Sedna here. Let me use a different color. Sedna. Sedna is here in this green circle, conjuncting Uranus in this T square as this is happening. And you'll see why Sedna has been important this whole time in a minute. But Sedna's involvement with this T square means that the awareness that we are bringing forth is going to be environmental. That's about the earth. And Sedna, even though she is the goddess of like the ocean and all of the sea creatures, one of the names for our planet is the blue planet, is because it's mostly water. And so when we think about healing the earth, it's not really entirely about healing the land part. There is a huge, and there's more water. So we're talking about healing water. We're talking about healing our planet through healing the waters. This is really what needs to be paid attention to. And we have seen some of these issues come up already. We're looking at data centers coming to steal water, to come steal land. And this is a huge issue right now that people are waking up to. And this moment that we're coming up to with Chiron going into Taurus is going to be making us acutely aware of where, why, and when they're going to be trying to do this to us. Um, I think that one of the main things that Chiron is going to be interested in this time around, because we're coming to finish one cycle and beginning another. And so one of the main things that Chiron is going to be dealing with this for the next 50 years is going to be these data centers and uh, building in a way that is about housing non-people is becoming an issue. Buildings that don't nurture people, uh, buildings that don't fit in with Earth itself, and the ways that the ways that buildings specifically have been infringing on nature and taking away our human right to experiencing this earth in its more natural state. And that is going to probably be what is on the agenda for Chiron for the next 50 years. Because we discovered Chiron in Taurus. And when we discovered Chiron in Taurus, it was at 3 degrees of Taurus. Let me get rid of my drawings and hopefully I can go into another chart. Yes, here we go. Chiron's discovery on November 1st, 1977. And I put the chart for 9 p.m. because obviously Chiron needs to be in the night sky in order to be discovered. I mean, I'm just going old school by it. And the chart is cast for San Diego, California. And I just got this information off of Wikipedia, and I built this chart based on that. And for all intents and purposes, it's all I need. Let me get my drawing back. How do draw. Okay, so here we go. And Chiron was discovered at 3 degrees in Taurus. Chiron was conjunct Sedna in Taurus. Wow, wasn't that interesting? So the issues that were being brought up immediately when Chiron was discovered was wanting to save the whales. And that's one of the reasons why I kept mentioning that is because Sedna is the goddess of the ocean. Her body parts created the ocean animals, the animals of the ocean in the north here. And this is a um a myth from, the icy parts, the frozen parts. I have a video on Sedna, and so if you want to know more about Sedna, you can find that video in my Astro Mythology series. But I just thought that was so interesting that when Chiron was discovered, people were inspired to want to save the whales. And I believe that this is Sedna and Chiron speaking together. And that's why Chiron, through all of these 50 years, up until the return that will be coming next year, we have been really focused on these, um, you know, saving Earth animals. We have big groups of people that are vegetarian and vegan because they want to save animals, mammals. They want to save the animals. I just thought that was really interesting. And I'm not going to say that it's misguided or any of that because it's a specific person's wounded sensibilities that they're acting on. And so a lot of the um 1970s kids, say 1977, 78, 79, um, we all have this connection to Chiron's discovery because of when we were born close to its discovery. Um, and we all have, a lot of us have this sensibility about wanting to save Earth animals. And as Chiron moves into the next phase, the next 50 years after the return, um, that'll be happening in June, on June 8th, 2027. There'll be actually three returns. Three. Oh my goodness. So it's going to be taking up a long period of time. It's going to be a slow becoming of what is the next phase of Chiron. And so, yeah, um, I I just was like, wow. And over here, I just thought this was interesting too, that we've got, oh, that's kind of bad. We have the Sun and Uranus conjunct when Chiron was discovered. I'm not sure if Sedna was discovered yet. I don't think so. But retroactively, I can see that like Sedna was there having an influence. And we have the sun down here in Scorpio, which is about, you know, um, looking past the surface, looking deeper than the surface. Um, the investigator, deep transformation, um, intensity, and mastery. Mastery is one of the key words about the Scorpio energies, is because it's also a key word for Chiron. It means mastery. Yes, Chiron was a master healer in mythology until Chiron couldn't heal himself. And maybe this is a good time to tell the story about Chiron's mythology and how it relates, and so you can see the relationship. Chiron was a master healer and was having an event. The way that these stories are initiated is kind of silly because the main event happens later, but the initiation of the story is that Chiron and Hercules are about to enjoy some good wine, and the other centaurs are party animals, and they want in on the fun. And they come and create an uproar, and there's violence for some reason, and Chiron accidentally gets wounded with a poison dart or a poison spear, poisoned weapon that has the poison that killed Medusa, or Medusa's poison. There is an element of Medusa being played out here also. So this wound that Chiron gets in this chaotic scene that's initiated for seemingly no reason brings about his inability to heal himself. So he's miserable and he can heal other people. He is a master healer, but he can't heal himself. And after suffering for however long, Chiron decides to make a proposal to Zeus to be put in the place of Prometheus. Because Prometheus is chained to a rock and vultures eat his liver and his liver grows back and he is constantly being tortured. And so he's being tortured and Chiron thinks, well, both of us shouldn't suffer at the same time. So he asks Zeus to put himself in place of Prometheus. And Zeus is in complete awe and is totally moved by Chiron's offer. And he has a moment of compassion for both of them. And he sets Prometheus free. And he also grants Chiron the death that Chiron is asking for and puts Chiron in the sky, immortalized forever as the sign of Sagittarius. And that's where we get Sagittarius. So in this story, we have all these different elements. We have poison, and we have some kind of weird betrayal. For some reason, it seems like it's for no reason. This wound seems like it happens for no reason, but it is our sacred wound. So when you're thinking about what wounds might be coming up as Chiron makes its journey into Taurus, you might want to consider that these wounds might feel like they're not um, they're not fair, right? You might feel like they're not fair. So those are the things that are going to be coming up. And those are the things because if it's a wound that feels like it's not fair, then how are we going to access healing it? If we can't find a way to somehow take a little bit of responsibility for it. And this is where the challenge and the really painful part of Chiron comes up. Yeah. Because Chiron in that mythological story is ultra compassionate. And so one of the ways and one of the secrets, keys, because Chiron is the glyph is a key. Let's see, I can't do that very well. The glyph is a key. And so the key to healing, for any kind of healing to happen in the realm and under the influence of Chiron, is one of the keys is going to be compassion. And that's when people are as desensitized as they are these days, it's going to be hard to find that compassion. And that's why it's such a major evolutionary step to find compassion, to look for it, to find it, to actively practice. Because um, where else is healing actually going to come from? So yeah, I've been talking for a long time. I just want to make sure that I One of the really good books that is about Chiron that I need to mention is the Chiron, the Rainbow Bridge by Barbara Hans Clow. It is life-changing. And even if you don't really know a lot about astrology and um, you have any kind of personal planets next to Chiron, or if you're having a hard time with your wounds, psychological wounds, I really recommend picking up this book and reading it. It will give you a break from the kind of information that is being thrown at you these days, and that's always a nice thing. And it will definitely feed and nurture your soul. I can't recommend this book enough. Everybody that I talk to that will listen, I have mentioned that they should read this book. I loved it, and I got so much out of it. I personally have Chiron conjunct my sun, and I just didn't know why I went through some of the things that I went through in life. And this is why I say that sometimes the wounds that Chiron, uh, it's not that Chiron creates the wound. Chiron is creating the conditions for the wound to happen because it is actually our sacred wound. But it does seem like it is really unfair, and that it's like it happened, like you don't deserve it. Um, and those are going to be the themes, especially in your childhood, that are going to be coming up. Um, and just know that part of the process is going to be in surrendering to the healing, uh, surrendering to receiving messages about healing. And that a lot of the psychological wounding that Chiron is all about, it seems all very unfair. It's about betrayal, abandonment, guilt and shame, victimization, and there's also the inner critic and a lack of self-love. And those are definitely, the lack of self-love is definitely a theme with Chiron in Taurus. And let's see, I wanted to take a look at Chiron's return for a minute here because it won't be happening until June 8th, 2027. So we're a year until this is happening. But this is where astrology gets really interesting because at uh we're looking at the evolution. What is the evolution that's happening here? So when Chiron comes to 3 degrees, making its very first return. Now, I said that it's going to be happening 3 times. I don't have charts for all of the 3 times because maybe I can make another video at some point talking about that. But the first return is going to be on June 8th, 2027. And then Chiron will go retrograde at some point. And then in October 8th, 2027, it will make another return going retrograde. And then on April 5th, 2028, will be the last return at 3 degrees going direct. So during this whole time, during this whole time, and I would say even from the first ingress into Taurus, we're going to be faced with all of these issues of self-worth and energy crisis type talk. It's definitely going to be out there. All of the things that were happening back in 1977 are up for resolution. And I definitely don't think that we'll be going through the same exact thing the same exact way, because that's not how evolution happens. But we do live in patterns and cycles. And so we'll be seeing these energy crisis stuff come up again, but in a way that has been probably very healed, actually. We have a lot more solar, wind, water energy. We have, um, even nuclear energy is going to be setting us apart from relying on entirely relying on oil. And because oil was the big deal back in 1977, that was what we relied on entirely to get around. And we've got, yes, we do have a huge dependence on oil. And that's why during this return time, these issues will be coming up again, but possibly with more of a final resolution. And we'll be moving into the next set of issues, which are going to be probably more based on land and water usage, and not so much on oil usage, because we're going to realize that the land and the water are much more valuable resources. And with regards to science, uh, we have we had all these scientific discoveries, explorations, and endeavors that we were going out on in 1977, the late 70s. And all of these things are going to be coming to resolution as, as well. And so what I wanted to point out here is we have the ruler of Taurus, which is Venus, in this conjunction with Sedna. So, and we have Uranus very close by too. And so I believe that what we are really going to be facing for the next 50 years, as I already said, is land and water usage with regards to our technological advances. And Sedna is here in the middle between it all, between Venus and Uranus, to basically mediate what's best for the Earth, because she will get very upset otherwise. And we'll go hungry if she gets upset. We will not be happy. Things will not be okay on Earth or in the water, especially, which will affect the Earth and the land. So we uh we will have the shamanic community coming out to talk about the moderation, the balance, the mediation between technology and the earth. Technology and our resources that are the most important resources. Now, Venus being in Gemini when this happens for the Chiron return. So Venus is the ruler of Taurus, and Venus is in Gemini, where when you really talk about Gemini and you get down to it, the Gemini energy really is about the spirit that infuses all of us into light and life. The spirit, life, our mind, everything that essentially comes together and creates what we know as existence. It all organizes through the Gemini field, through the spirit. And so there is going to be a lot of energetic spirit coming up, coming forth about what is life and what is important about our resources. And this will be coming into all of our mental field. And it will be in our mental field, and then we will be able to feel it in our bodies. And this is one instance where um, I truly believe that we'll be having these spontaneous revelations about valuing our resources that are the most important things. You know, we can talk about lots of different kinds of resources that really make our life convenient. But what about the resources that basically are about whether or not we survive? You know, that's water and land together. It makes the earth. And so, yeah, when Chiron makes its return next year here, uh, that is going to be really when the issues of oil resources kind of finalize and we start shifting and looking at what is this new paradigm? What is the new resource that fuels our economy? Because Taurus is about money and uh, again, about nature and our values and relationships. And all of that stuff goes together. I missed any date. I don't think I did. Yeah, so the one of the main things to remember about Chiron during these, you know, during the ingress and the return and the whole time that Chiron is in Taurus is that we are looking at the link between the spiritual world and the material world. And we ha we have been we've already been looking at that a lot ever since Chiron was discovered. And when we come back around to this return, we're going to have a next level of understanding of what this connection between the spiritual and the material world is, and what our what kind of medicine our sacred wounds are turning into. Uh, and there will be an element of mastery for our whole culture that will be coming up. Um, it's like a fruition of all of our efforts. Because we have been trying to tend to the environment ever since Chiron was discovered. We've been trying to figure out what any of that, what does that even look like? Just becoming aware of something, and it's going to take a long time for us. It's going to take a long time for us to heal these big societal wounds, things, we've taken us hundreds of years to get where we are here. And so Chiron making this return, Chiron ingressing into Taurus, is really signifying a new level of figuring out how we are going to approach healing the earth next. And we can't heal the earth without individually tending to our own wounds individually. So I hope that some of this helped. I hope that yeah, I hope that we all are able to come to more of an understanding uh, as to how to have more compassion for each other, for the planet, you know, but keeping in mind the mythology of Chiron is very sacrificial, very compassionate, and very masterful. And um, we all do want to strive to be as helpful, compassionate, and as much of a master as Chiron. I'm gonna stop sharing this. All right. So, well, I enjoyed getting all of that off of my chest and expressing all of that stuff about Chiron. It was really interesting looking into the history of what was going on when Chiron was discovered. And I really have a sense of hope as to what comes next because we're all feeling it in our hearts already. We're already we're already there. We're just waiting for this energy to come through us. And that's really what astrology is talking about, is this divine timing. And so I hope that you guys got something out of this. This video will be very helpful for a long time. So feel free to like and share it because Chiron's energies are going to be really, um, they're going to be significant in the next year. Yeah, we'll be definitely be faced with our own wounds and the wounds of the earth. And so, all right, I will be back next time. Thanks for watching. All right, bye.